Hello everyone, my name's Stonesy Boy and welcome back to Stonesy Reads. I don't know what to say. Oh yeah, I know exactly what to say. Last time, Critten, I think his name is, Critten, ran away, and the other ones are like, "Oh, I hate that hedgehog!" And then, yeah. And Farnham and his friends are trying to build a portal. Well, I think he's going to build a portal. After all, that's what Chapter 17 is titled. Or, if I were to more say, in proper tone, Chapter 17. If you build it. To Farnham's delight, his friends had agreed to help them with building the obsidian portal on the zoo's grounds. Despite many misgivings they might have had, he had to admit to himself that he was a bit nervous about it himself. The idea of creating a portal to the nether right there where he worked and lived and unnerving, but he was ready to give it a shot. Once he'd given a strider back to the zoo, everything had turned around for Farnham. He was on his way to building the place he'd always dreamed of, but never done much actually to create. He wasn't about to back down from that now. Despite the surprising and growing bravery that he displayed recently, Farnham nearly screamed when, late one night while the others had already left for the day, the piglin he met in the nether showed up at the gates to his zoo. Okay, he had to admit to himself later he had screamed, but only a little. "What are you doing here?" he asked the piglin once he managed to recover the shock. "How did you find me?" The piglin, their name was Critten, as they reminded him, couldn't even understand Farnham, of course, much less answer him. Despite that, Critten did their best to explain how, what, and why they arrived at the zoo, using a complex and nearly incomprehensible series of gestures and meaningful grunts. From what little Farnham could decipher, the piglin had come through the obsidian portal, by which they met each other. How else would they have managed it, right? And then they must have followed them all the way back there. Finding the tunnel he carved to the surface made some sense, but he was stunned that the piglin had managed to track him all the way back from here to the zoo. He wondered then if they had in fact done that, or if they just wandered around aimlessly until they stumbled upon him. Maybe they followed the strider here. The animal did have a distinct smell that Farnham found slightly unpleasant, but it might have been enough for someone with a nose built like a piglin's to follow. It made as much sense as anything else, which was to say, not much. Of course, now Critten had gotten here wasn't nearly as important as why. What were they doing here? Why had they sought him out? What did they want from him? These were simple questions, but apparently complex answers that Critten was unable to communicate with grunts, snorts, and squeals. Of course, it was impossible to tell or understand what Farnham was asking him, or if they were simply ignoring him and trying to tell their story. The most that Farnham got out of them was that the piglin had really wanted to find him, for whatever reason that they were overjoyed that they actually made it happen. It was around then that Farnham figured out why Critten seemed to be such a rush about it. The piglin stared in a little green, and a rush of energy they had been running on began to fade. The look in their face turned from excited to desperate. Critten took a pack and pulled out a glass bottle. They uncorked it and tipped it over their face and tried to shake the last dregs inside it into their mouth. They set the bottle down and stared at it in despair. Very little had come out of it, and they seemed like they badly needed whatever had once been in there. "What was that?" Farnham asked. "How can I help?" The idea struck him, and he guided Critten over to the crafting table he had in the back of his quarters. The piglin thanked him for the effort and kind nod and turned the bottle upside down over the table to show that it was empty, but not that they had the proper ingredients to fill it. "What do you need?" The piglin's correlation had gotten worse. Whatever they wanted, they were going to be able to ask for in simple gestures. Then they stuck a finger in the air as if they got a fantastic idea. They reached into their pack again and found a stick of charcoal. They took it and began to draw something on a blank wall over a crafting table. So Farnham stared at the object, watching someone scrawl on his wall with a bit of charcoal, but he stopped himself and waited as patiently as he could for the piglin to finish. When they were done, they stepped back, flung their arms wide, and pointed at both of them toward what they had just drawn, an obsidian portal. "You want me to take you back to the obsidian portal?" Critten couldn't have understood their words, as he began snorting and nodding vigorously in agreement. What else could they have said, right? Farnham swallowed hard. He had already told himself he'd never go back to the underworld to find that portal, but now there was Critten, pleading with him to do exactly that. "All right," he said, trying to get the overexcited Critten to calm down the moment. "I just need to get some things together, and see if I can get my friends to come with me." He brought them to the table of his kitchen and sat them down. "Wait here, I'll be right back." With that, he ran off to gather his friends. He ran as fast as he could, promising each of his friends that he would explain the longer way. It didn't seem like it had taken much time at all, but when he turned to the kitchen with Micro and Grinchard awake, he found Critten slumped over on the table. Grinchard actually took a step back. "It's a piglin!" Micro rushed to the piglin's side. "Were they like this when you left?" Grinchard stopped himself, reaching for his sword, but if Critten had been unconscious, Farnham had no doubt the explorer would have drawn it. Didn't I mention that? Farnham said as by way of apology, although he wasn't quite sure how it mattered. Greenshirt squinted at Gritton, making sure they weren't going to leap up and attack them at all. Piglins are dangerous. They're usually just attack people on sight. The explorer looked over at others. Are either of you wearing anything gold? The greedy things see gold and they seem to lose all sense. Apparently satisfied that no one in the room was wearing anything that might trigger an attack. Greenshirt crossed their arms over their chests and staring very eyes on the suffering piglin. Barnum opened his mouth to leap in Creighton's defense, and then remembered how the piglin had attacked them the day they first met. Maybe it was just all a big misunderstanding, or maybe they're not all bad. This one here is the one I met when I was in the Nether, and they were decent to me, eventually. Granger gave Farnham an I'm impressed look. You did better with them than anyone I've ever heard about them. Lots of people who meet them on the first time they never survive to tell anyone about it. Farnham glared at his friend, exasperated. Now, if that was the case, how would anyone know that? You'd just find them full of piglin arrows. Micro prodded Creighton on the shoulder, shook her shoulders, but then get any response. Whatever their intentions, they don't look like they're much of a threat at the moment. Grincher peered into Creighton's face, pulled back their eyelids for a moment, and then stepped back. Now that's out cold. They're still breathing, but not partially well. Farnham glanced around the kitchen. What could have happened to them? Do you think they drank or ate something that didn't agree with them? Actually, they were looking all that good when I left. Piglins are allergic to our world, Grinchard said flatly. They can't take it over here. What, seriously? Farnham found this hard to believe. That's why we don't have to worry about them following us over here. If you ever encounter a piglin in the Nether, all you have to do is run back to the obsidian portal, and you're in the clear. They don't even try to chase you after you. Grincher cocked their head and stared at Creighton, mystified. Well, not usually. The ones that are foolish enough to try and turn into zombified piglins long after. Anyhow, this one sure took a sweet time coming after you. They're not a threat. They helped me in the Nether. They gave me a strider. Then, all that time later, managed to track you back here and collapse in your kitchen. Wild. Just wild. Micra rubbed the back of her head. Maybe Grinchard's right. Maybe it's something to do with the overworld that's making them like this. Farnham pointed at the bottle Creighton had left on the crafting table. They tried to drink something out of that, but it's all gone. Maybe it was some kind of medicine. If it's all gone, it doesn't matter. That won't help us at all. Well, if we don't figure out some way to help the piglin, they're going to die on us, right here. I have a solution, Grinch said. In fact, we already started on it. The others stared at him, waiting for them to continue. We need to get them back to the Nether, right? It's too far back for the gate, Farnham protested. We'll never make it. How long would it take us to finish the one that we started here? Everyone turned toward Micro now. She looked flustered for a moment, and she tried to figure out how to answer the question. Not long, she finally said. I don't know if it'll be soon enough for the piglin, but it could be worth a shot. Then let's do it, Farnham said. Creighton's breathing already seemed shallower than they had walked in and found them like this. Now, Chapter 18. Let's make a deal. The last thing Creighton remembered was sitting on the table in Farnham's kitchen, doing their level best to stay awake. The potion they drunk that had finally worn off entirely, though, and they had no more defense left against the poisonous effects that the overworld had on their kind. It seemed then that the sickness was even worse on the surface than it had been in the cavern, but maybe that was just because they were exposed to it all for so long. They knew when they reached Farnham's house that they needed help fast. They just didn't know if they could make the overworld understand in time. When they woke up back in the Nether, at first Creighton was terrified at how they somehow wound up back in Great Bungus Bastion, where now awaiting execution at Ugup's hands. Then, they saw Farnham and two other overworlders leaning over them. The advisor wasn't sure what to feel. Relief, sure, at least about still being alive. They had no idea how long they had been back in the Nether, but they are perfectly fine now, and there isn't another piglin in sight. What did this mean now? They hadn't really planned all that far ahead. They only wanted to get away from Bungus and Uggup before they put an end to the advisor. It's hard to think too much about a future when you weren't sure you were going to have one at all. Farnham reached out of the Creighton to their feet, and they accepted the assistance. As they glanced over the overworld's shoulders, they saw a brand new obsidian portal right there, and they realized that Farnham had brought them into a whole different part of the Nether. Instead of a crimson forest that Creighton was used to, they found themselves standing in the middle of a wide expanse of netherrack spotted with rivers and lakes of lava that seemed to sprawl and forever under the relentlessly reddish roof. They had to be in the Nether waste. Creighton had rarely felt so exposed, and they instantly longed for the relative safety of the crimson forest. They had no idea how far they might be from Bungus Bastion. Hopefully it was far enough. One of the other things that Creighton had learned from deciphering the pictograms in that cave in which they first met Farnham was how obsidian portals work. You just need a lot of obsidian and a bite of fire to get it going. The trouble, of course, was that there was no water in the Nether, so it was impossible to make obsidian. It didn't occur there naturally either. The only source of it would be from obsidian portals that could already be built, or had somehow been ruined, but even then Creighton figured you could just need something to mine it or you couldn't do anything with it. The advisor didn't have any such tools and never had seen them. In fact, that someone like Farnham and his friends, who clearly were not powerful figures in the overworld, had managed to construct an obsidian portal, gave Crichton an idea. If they could manage it, why couldn't someone as smart as the advisor give it a try? Crichton uses gestures to express their internal gratitude for Farnham and his friends for saving their life. If the overworlders hadn't gone to such extraordinary measures, the advisor would assuredly have died in Farnham's kitchen. Farnham's friends hung back and allowed him to deal with the piglin, which pleased Crichton. It was hard enough to try to communicate with one overworlder, much less 3 at a time. On top of that, none of the others seemed to trust Crichton much, although the advisor was used to that. In Piglin society, no one trusted anyone anyhow. After Crichton finished thanking Farnham, the overworlder still seemed concerned about the advisor's health and safety. He pointed out his pack and to theirs, asking if there's anything that Crichton might need from him and his friends. Crichton made a show of not wanting to bother the overworlders any further, but as they had hoped, Farnham insisted. The advisors reluctantly decided to take him up on his offer. Now they only needed to figure out a way to communicate what they wanted to him. Crichton pointed at the obsidian gate, and Farnham nodded at them, apparently confirming that this was the way that had brought the advisors back to the Nether. Crichton waved all off, trying to make it clear that he misunderstood what they had meant. This time, Crichton pointed at the obsidian portal and mimed the holding of a pickaxe, chopping at the black rock and made it the frame of the portal. Realization dawned on Farnham's face as he understood what Crichton wanted, or so they hoped. Farnham held up his hands and asked Crichton to wait while he conferred with his friends. The 3 of them moved away and be able to speak to one another without Crichton listening, even though it would have been pointless for the advisor to try. When Farnham explained to the others that Crichton wanted, they shook their heads, some harder than others. They weren't all that excited about giving Crichton anything, and seemed to think that they'd done enough for the piglin by saving their life. While Crichton found it hard to argue with that kind of logic, it wasn't going to keep them safe from the piglins in the great Bungus Bastion. And if they weren't going to give the advisor what they needed out of the goodness of their hearts, which Crichton had never expected anyhow, then the advisor would have to offer them something they wanted to trade. Crichton didn't know of the other overworlders at all, but having walked through Farnham's Bastion, or whatever he called the place he lived in, they had identified that he wanted animals and more of them. Crichton drew a crude image of a strider on the ground, then beckoned Farnham over to see it. Despite the advisor's lack of artistic talent, Farnham immediately recognized that they draw the game excited. He pointed at it over and over and barked out some unintelligible words to his compatriots. This seemed to fully pique their interest, too. When Farnham pointed at the drawing of the strider, he tried out a number of different gestures until Crichton figured out what he meant. More. Not just more. Different. Farnham wanted new creatures for displays in his place. A new strider might be okay, but something different would be even better, and that something was Crichton thought they would deliver. The fact that the mobs they needed to capture might feel differently about the problem that the advisor would solve later, they hoped. The advisor had no idea what seemed exotic and unusual to an overworlder. The creatures of the Nether were all far too similar to Crichton, but they were willing to keep bringing them creatures until Farnham got something he liked. All they wanted in return was obsidian and a diamond pickaxe in which to shape it. The others gazed at Crichton with suspicion. Clearly they wanted to know why the advisor desired these things and what they proposed to do with them. Explaining this without any common language was tricky, but what choice did Crichton have but to try? The advisor tried to focus their attempts to communicate on the fact that having away access to the overworld from wherever they happened to be in the Nether would make them safe. Crichton would not be sure where the place they were at right then was, and using the first obsidian portal, the one through which Farnham had originally met them, was too dangerous. They wanted to be able to build another one close to where they lived. Crichton did not, of course, share the fact that they had been exiled from their current home and that, from a certain point of view, any one place was probably good as another. Glancing around the area, though, Crichton could see that this place, which was somewhere in the Nether Waste, was not safe to live in, and they hoped the overworlders would agree with the advisor on the salient point at least. It seemed to take forever, but eventually Crichton and Farnham managed to get the other overworlders to agree to their deal. Farnham would have Crichton a diamond pickaxe and the remaining obsidian that they had on hand, and Crichton would go out and find creatures to put on display in Farnham's expeditions. On top of that, the advisor agreed to toss in plenty of netherrack to help the mobs feel at home in the overworld. Farnham and Crichton even shook their hands on the deal, which Crichton had once been told a weird sign of deep respect between the overworlders. The Piglins didn't care much for such things. With them, any bargain was only good for as long as both parties cared to keep it up. And the end of either side to the agreement. On the surface, the deal Crichton had struck with the overworlders seemed to be good for everyone involved. The advisor didn't really understand why Farnham wanted animals, whether to show it off to overworlders or as the subjects for experiments of his own.
but he was willing to hand over things that were incredibly valuable in the Nether. They weren't going to argue with them. In fact, Cretan had already coming up with ideas for him for things that they could do and the ability to build an obsidian grate, or better yet, obsidian gates. Once the overworlders returned, they shut the obsidian portal down behind him. Cretan didn't blame them for that. They would have done the same. After all, you never know what might come creeping out of the Nether after you. It was just one thing to leave an open portal to the bottom of the pit in an abandoned cave that few people could ever reach. It was another thing entirely to leave that same passageway between worlds open in your home. Of course, Cretan would have reactivated the obsidian portal at any point they wanted. Most creatures in the Nether wouldn't have any notion of how to manage that, which was perfect in the advisor's mind. That made them that much more valuable to others who might want to use the portals, others like the Great Bungus.
Chapter 19. Tricks and Treats. This time, when Cretan entered the bastion, they went in, although the front gates were held high. They informed the guards that they were here to see the Great Bungus, and they chuckled as they watched one of them scurry away to alert their leader of the fact the advisor had returned. Cretan had no doubt that the guard would also track down Ugub and let the brute know the advisor's arrival as well. That didn't bother them in the least. They just signaled for the other guards to lead the way to the throne room. By the time Cretan entered the throne room, Bungus and Ugub were already waiting for them. They did not look pleased. More to the point, Ugub seemed furious, steaming, and already draw their axe, and put an end to the advisor in a single nod from their leader. Bungus, on the other hand, seemed ready to listen, at least for the moment. "Hail the Great Bungus," Cretan called out as they swept into the room. Normally, they wouldn't stand on such ceremony with Bungus. They'd known each other far too long for that, but they felt like making an impression on everyone else in the room. The advisor hadn't shown up for the beg for their life. They were here to deal in earnest. "Hail Cretan," the great Ugub responded on the throne. "Hail nothing," Ugub growled as they stalked toward the advisor. "You got a lot of nerve showing up here like this. How about I save us all some time and kill you now? Then you would prove that you're just as much a fool as everyone thinks." "You're right, Wait, what?" Ugub couldn't believe that Cretan was standing up to him. Not so long ago, the advisor had been Ugub's prisoner, and they had only escaped through trickery. To come back here as if nothing had happened at all was a massive insult to the brute, just as Cretan had intended. Ugub drew their axe and brandished it at Cretan's head. "You can't trick me again. Not with your feet, and not with your tongue." If the two of them had been alone, Cretan knew that the brute would have cut him down right then and there. But they weren't alone. "Stop right there, Ugub." The Great Bungus remained seated in their chair, showing the brute and everyone else in the room that they didn't need to rise or put Ugub back in the proper place. As Bungus intended, Ugub froze, their axe hefted halfway in the preparation of a vicious strike. The brute didn't look back at the leader for confirmation, but simply stopped, waiting for the next orders. Cretan allowed themselves a smile when they knew they would make Ugub angrier. They had been ready to leap out of the way if the brute had actually begun a swing at them, but it pleased them at no end to watch Ugub squirm under Bungus' gaze instead. Bungus cut straight to the heart of the matter. They'd never been one for banter. "What's your grand plan, old friend?" The term dripped with sarcasm. "Given how you left us, it had better be a good one." "It doesn't matter," Ugub bared the teeth of the advisor. "I'll put an end to you either way." Cretan laughed out loud. Even you aren't that short-sighted. I understand if you want to kill me, but I only did what I did in order to get away. None of you could have done any less. None of us were about to be put to death. I respect the Great Bungus and his flawless judgment." Cretan wondered if they were laying it on too thick. But then it came to matters like this, it was hard to overdo it. "And I'm sure that judgment will turn in my favor as soon as I can explain myself. Words are cheap. Words are tricks. The time for words is done." Bungus snorted that. They weren't about to let Ugub dictate what happened here. "Speak, advisor. Tell us what you came here to say." Ugub glanced back at the leader, stunned at Bungus with Cretan giving Cretan such a leeway. But other than acting offended, Ugub didn't do anything to stop it. "I ran away because I needed to implement my plan." Cretan spoke out just to Bungus, but to anyone else in the bastion who might be listening in. "The walls inside this place are terribly thin. I have figured out the solution to all of our problems." Ugub scoffed at them. "Does it involve all of us putting our tails between our legs and running away like you did? It involves us invading the overworld." Cretan watched his guard in the corner drop the jaws in awe. Ugub shot the advisor through the suspicious glare, but Ugub motioned for them to continue. "You saw the pictures that lie inside of the cave in the overworld, Great Bungus. They tell a saga of when the ancient Piglins civilization stormed the overworld and conquered the weaklings there with our crossbows and our axes, and all sorts of other fantastic weapons too, like the monstrous mace, back in the days when our bastions were new and our people knew nothing but victory." The Great Bungus nodded at this, as if they both had seen the images on the wall and understood them, which was unlikely.
Bungus and Ugub had probably fled for safety in the Nether shortly after Crichton had left them, but Bungus wasn't likely to admit that, or admit that they didn't understand the images, especially not in front of everyone in the throne room. As proof of the tales told on the wall were true, after this ancient weapon, known as a flail, Crichton reached into their pack and drew out the amazing weapon they found in the cave and laid it in the great Bungus' feet. Everyone over in the room gasped at the flail, and Bungus snatched it up and began to swing it about, with a mean grin forming in the ruler's face. "So what?" said Ugub. "It was long ago, and we can't just walk into the overworld whenever we want. Your little trick proved that. Does the fact that you returned to us prove that your cure didn't work so well?" Bungus asked until he let the weapon's block smack into the ground next to him with a satisfying thud. "Otherwise, why would you come back?" Crichton smiled. It was exactly the question they wanted to ask. "Because I had concocted a grand new plan." Ugub rolled their eyes at this. "Just like you always do. And like always, it's only talk." Frustrated by the interruption, Bungus motioned the brute to shut up. "What exactly do you mean?" they asked Crichton. "My cure didn't last longer than I hoped." "For how long?" "If it was a permanent cure, they'll still be hiding out there," Ugub snapped. Crichton didn't let that fact that the brute was right slow them down. "Long enough for me to make it from the cave all the way up to the settlement in the overworld." The Great Bungus scratched their chin. "So we could invade the overworld. All we need are crates full of that cure. Can you make that for us?" Crichton bowed their head to the leader, showing their proper deference. "I can," greet Bungus. Ugub grunted in disbelief. "This sounds like a trap to me. We bring our entire army up there and then run out of time. Even if we win that battle, we could lose the war." "This is true," Crichton admitted, which Ugub shocked. The brute narrowed his eyes at his advisor, fully expecting another trick. They didn't know how right they were, but it was a great trick that Ugub couldn't possibly see coming. Crichton relished in the thought of the moment before they continued. "We could be stuck there, unable to return to the Nether in time, but I convinced the overworlders to build another obsidian portal." It took a long moment for the others in the room to understand quickly what that meant. The Great Bungus was quickest on the uptake. They narrowed their eyes at the advisor. "You managed to speak to an overworlder?" Crichton nodded. "And you could make sense of that nonsense they jabber? Enough to trick them into making a portal right in the heart of their settlement." Bungus nodded along as they puzzled out just what they meant. "So we can invade them, conquer them, then return here our overworld poison us?" "Precisely." The Great Bungus clapped their hands together with glee. "Wonderful! Then we can do it. We can actually do it, like they did in the days of old. We can invade this strange place of theirs and make it our own. Soon the overworld and all of its riches will be ours." "Ha!" Ugub snorted decisively. "That's good, this one little settlement to us. Are we then to live there and just wait for the creatures on the other settlement to rally to their cause and attack us?" There had been far more than a single settlement in the overworld, Crichton knew, and once word of the Piglin invasion reached those other places, the creatures there would not ignore the threat of an army of well-armed Piglins would present. They would arrive in force to drive the Piglins back into the Nether, which would leave them right where they started, only weaker and fewer in number. The one settlement will be but the first, and that would be the beachhead from which we will conquer the whole overworld. Ugub hefted their axe. They were getting tired of this argument, and ready to put a swift end to it. And if we only tolerate being there for not a full day at a time, how will we manage that? Because we don't have to stay in the same settlement forever. Instead, they can strike at all of the overworld settlements and destroy them one by one. Ugub scoffed at the thought. "And you think that they will wait patiently for us to do this? They won't have a choice. We will take the battle to them. From that one little settlement?" "Ha!" Ugub snorted so hard they nearly lost their balance. "No, we can strike at each of their settlements from the Nether through the obsidian gates. 2 gates are not enough. One in the settlement and one that comes out in a cave? That would never be enough." Crichton smiled at this. Now they had them. "Believe it or not, you fool, I agree. But I'm not talking about one portal, even 2. I'm talking about having as many portals as we need. As many as we could possibly want." The Great Bungus actually stood up on the throne and leaned toward Crichton, more confused than ever. "What is that you're saying?" "I'm telling you that I figured out how to build obsidian gates. And once we had enough obsidian, we can put new ones wherever we want." The hurt of Ugub's axe dropped and clanged to the floor. The urge to fight with Crichton, to kill him, had drained right out of them. In this room at this moment, the advisor had utterly defeated him. The Great Bungus, on the other hand, leaped down from the throne and charged straight at Crichton. When they met, the leader picked up the advisor up in the air and swung him around. "You did it! I knew you would do it! I never doubted! I always knew!" Crichton kept their mouth closed, not wanting to ruin the moment by pointing out that Bungus had entirely lost faith in them and exiled them from the bastion. If the advisor had been so rude as to mention this, the leader would have certainly claimed that they did this on purpose to encourage Crichton to come up with this exact solution. So this amazing result was actually the direct result of the way Bungus had treated them. In a way, Crichton admitted this was true. If they had not been kicked out of the bastion, if they had not been desperate that they fled to Farnham's home and escaped Ugub's wrath, they might have never figured out that they needed to do to allow the piglins to invade the overworld. But Creighton wasn't about to tell the Great Bungus that.
And that is that. I don't even need to move real quick and go change the name of something, blah, blah, blah. Because now we get to read the new chapter. I think next video is going to be pretty short, too. 144 to 162? 162. Okay. Only 18 pages, I think. If my math is right. 1 to 5, 8 to 6 to 2. Yep, 18 pages. That's not bad, but I think the one after that is... Actually, I don't think that one's bad either. Which one's the bad one? Hold on. 160... Hold on. I'll figure it out right now. And that's actually the final chapter, couple chapters, where we go to 202 to 223, which we're going to be there pretty dang soon. But yep, hope you guys are there with me, because I hope you guys have a super fantastic, wonderful day. People like, be efficient, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.